Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises. It's not just going to be me. We have a great guest this week, but just want to tell you at the end, we're going to touch on a couple other things. We're going to talk about blue chip ratio, which is a kind of an interesting metric to determine who maybe can win the national title this year. There are 16 teams that hit the blue chip ratio threshold, 5 in the North. We'll talk about that. NCAA makes a rule change on how many coaches can coach in practice. We'll talk about that. And then some big time recruiting news. So proud, man. The North is making me proud. 3 big time quarterback commits in the class of 2026 to 3 Northern schools. But leading off the show, best bets for the 2024 college football season with our great friend Tyler Shoemaker, who has a math thing, proprietary algorithm. I don't know. He invented math where he has a great way of analyzing college football. And he's going to tell you 5 win total overs he likes for the 2024 season. A lot of Northern teams in there. And 5 2024 under win totals he likes for the 2024 college football season. A lot of Northern teams in there. So this is a betting conversation because we want to do betting in a smart way here on Kings of the North. And we will this season. And I know some of you out there are into it. Some of you, because you, most places, most states, a lot of states now, you get it on your app. It's very easy to do. I always say I was never going to be a guy who was going to go out and bet with a bookie. But if I can bet $2 on an app on my phone, that's fun. So maybe you're like that. Maybe you're really into betting. Maybe you hate betting, but you like college football. And I think when you hear betting analysis, it helps you understand college football better. So Tyler Shoemaker is for everyone. I'm not. I'm not for everybody. Tyler Shoemaker is for everybody. So this is a great hour-long conversation digging into best bets on win totals for 2024. And then I'll see you back at the end, talk about some other stuff. All on Kings of the North. It's T-Shoe time here on Kings of the North. Tyler Shoemaker here. Longtime friend, but we're so excited to have you on KOTN. Tyler, what's going on, brother?
Man, it is great to make my KOTN debut. I love what you and Bill are doing with the show. Glad to be here. Hopefully, hopefully I'll be back.
Yeah, this is the first, but not the last we are anticipating because we do want to talk. There's 2 things that could happen. We want to talk about gambling on KOTN. So I can talk about gambling, but actually what we want to do is talk about gambling intelligently. And that means I need help. And that means we have a guy like you here because you have the Tyler Shoemaker incredibleness. I don't know what the I is for. It's the TSI and it helps you. It's a proprietary algorithm that I don't know. You and NASA came together, not Nassau, the Nassau, Bahamas. T-Shoe went to the Bahamas, had a couple Mai Tais, and was like, I thought up a math thing for football. No, NASA, you have information that you have created, and it allows you to be very intelligent with your sports gambling discussions. And so what we're going to do here on this episode, and again, I might be more down the line, we're going to talk about 5 of your best bet overs for teams for this college football season and 5 of your best bet unders. But first, T-Shoe, we want to kind of explain, for people who do know you, I think a lot of people watching and listening do know you, but maybe some don't. Who is this guy? Why should I listen to the TSI? So can you explain how you go about arriving at your numbers in college football?
Yeah. So obviously a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, have been with you and I for a long time. I got my start with this on Buckeye Talk with you back in 2018. But the TSI, in short, I want to answer the following questions. How many points would Team A be expected to score and allow against Team B? I want to break it down very simply, very easy to digest for the common fan. And then obviously we can leverage that information from a betting perspective. So that's what I like to do with it. It's been a growing process over the last 6 or 7 years, constantly making tweaks to the formula. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's an opponent adjusted and tempo adjusted metric that allows me to rate teams and project totals for every game in college football.
What were tweaks like this offseason? And one of the things I'm most curious about, I'll let you answer the first question first, and then I'll dive into my second. You've worked with me before. You know how it goes. Like, actually, Tyler, 9-part question. Part number 6. Go ahead. Like, what were some of the tweaks like this offseason for you in the TSI?
Yeah, so one thing that really jumped out in the last couple of seasons, particularly with totals, has been like a team like Iowa, for instance, because my metrics are kind of weighted to, or the baseline is the average FBS team. Every Iowa game, it was like I was projecting the total at 46 or 47, but then the Vegas over under comes out and it's 37, and I'm like, okay, how are they getting this low? So one of the big tweaks that I made was switching from like a projected points based formula to more of a percentage based, which allows me from a totals perspective to really get a broader range. So another team, for instance, USC or LSU last year is a good example. I would be projecting their totals at like 64, and then the over under comes out and it's 73. So I'm now, able to get a much wider range. So now when I look at my projections for this season, pretty much every Iowa game I've got in the 30s or low 40s. USC, LSU, teams like that that have played faster tempos in the past, I'm now getting those 70-point projections. So I think that's going to allow my numbers to be a lot more accurate, particularly from a total standpoint.
I think they call it the Ferentz factor. Ferentz factor. You got to Ferentz factor your numbers. That's just real. People in Iowa have been doing that for a decade. You got to the Ferentz factor. So if you want to take that, you can. The FF adjustment to the TSI. So is a sport like college football where roster turnover is ingrained in the sport, is it any more difficult than a professional sport where maybe, of course, there's turnover, but maybe there's little more consistency season to season with the key players on the team?
It is, I will say, kind of one of the key differences between how I arrive at my numbers, particularly in the preseason, and how other models come to theirs. I don't go fully transparent. I don't go through every roster player by player and assign a rating to every player and add it up, and that's how I get their rating. That's just not how I do it. That's way too time consuming. And honestly, it probably wouldn't be a whole lot more accurate trying to assign a value to the third tight end on a team, what I look at, I have a proprietary development rating where I look at what have your past 2 or 3 TSI ratings been at the end of the season relative to your 4-year weighted recruiting rankings. So that rewards teams like Iowa, again, for instance, that don't recruit, a bunch of 5 stars, but they develop them extremely well. They have great scheme, and that translates into higher power ratings. So, a lot of these models, every preseason you look, and there are teams that develop really well, but are always rated really low because they don't recruit great. And I'm like, okay, I've got to be able to account for that. So that was something I implemented last offseason. And I think enhanced that this offseason. So yeah, to get back to the root of your question, the roster turnover, I look at it more holistically than is this player worth 3 points to this team's rating? That's not how I do my ratings. And to be honest, I've said this several times before, I think individual players get overrated by the betting market. So, when you see a key injury, the line will move 4 or 5 points for, the other way. And in college, very few players are worth that. Maybe like a Caleb Williams type guy, but otherwise it all more is the head coach and the system more so than anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting. The over under the preseason totals for teams that we're going to talk about on this show. Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you think betting preseason win totals is smart? Is it silly? Should you save your money for hey, it's September 21st and I really like this game and I think the TSI is telling me, hey, this line is off a little bit? Or if you really are did your numbers really tell you something sometimes? Say, hey, the world is off on this team. I'm going to hammer a win total because my numbers are feeling really good about it.
So I like them. I don't love them where I'm just going crazy and betting 40 of them. That's the hard thing for someone like me, that I do enjoy betting. I do enjoy college football in particular. So having a rating and a win total projection for every team, I do have to be very disciplined and not just bet every single thing that my numbers say, because that would be an easy trap to fall into. And I mean, you'll catch me during the season on a Saturday firing off 10, 15 bets. And I'm like, all right, chill. Like, we need to just find our biggest edges and like, just relax, stop. That's the hard thing with having a number on every single game. It does make it difficult of like, where do I draw the line to not bet? But no, as far as win totals go, there are edges to be had. That's why one of the big improvements to my college football guide this season compared to seasons past is I now have the win probability added up. So you can go to a team's page. Like if you're interested in Oregon, you can go to Oregon's team page and say, okay, their over under is 10.5. TSI gives them a whatever percent chance to go over that win total. So you can really see the math breakdown. So there are mathematical edges to be had based on my numbers.
Yeah. I used to do this back in the day covering Ohio State, where I'd go through like the schedule, 12-game Ohio State schedule, and I'd say, and here was my algorithm, 98.3%. So I'd be like, Ohio State has a 98.3% of beating, 98.3% chance of beating Rutgers, and I'll multiply that by their 77.8% chance of beating Penn State. And by the end of the year, I'd be like, they have an 11% chance of going undefeated. That's math. That's an algorithm, right? Isn't that an algorithm? I could call NASA with that, right?
Honestly, that is way more advanced. You know, I hear a lot of people that'll talk about win totals, and they'll literally just go through the schedule and be like, well, that's a win, that's a loss. And so they're just assigning 100% or 0% to every game. And that's just not how the math works, unfortunately.
Package deal, NASA. Package deal. Can you imagine somebody going into space as part of something that I was involved with? Never would somebody do that. Death wish. It's like, hey, who designed this rocket ship? Oh, it's Doug guy. Okay, so you have sent me 5 over win totals and 5 under win totals. And Tishu, I'm not afraid to say, a couple of them, you absolutely broke my heart. Just and twist it. So we'll get to those in a moment. Some of the other ones, I was like, yeah, this guy. Yeah, I'm like that. So you do go through when you're analyzing things like this. Your numbers tell you things about every team, but you're looking for where the numbers are the strongest, where the numbers are giving you the greatest edge versus what Vegas is putting out, right? That's kind of what you're saying. And again, like there's a number for everything, but you would advise don't bet everything. Look for the biggest edge. Correct.
And one thing to keep in mind, you know, especially for those of you that are going to get my guide and you're going to look and see, okay, I project 9.8 wins for this team. Their win total is 9. That's an automatic over bet. You also have to look at how the odds makers are applying the juice, you know, to the over or under, because with the juice, that's implied probability. So then it becomes a math equation, which I've also outlined, you know, so you can see the math very easily. I've already got the edges sorted for you. So that is how I come to my win total bets over or under. It's based on not just the actual number of, you know, 9, 9.5, whatever, but the implied probability that the odds makers have set.
So listen, so we know there are some people watching this who don't care about gambling at all, might even be anti-gambling. I still think this is interesting for college football fans like that because it's telling you information. Just don't apply the information by getting on an app and betting any money on it. But just like, oh man, like Tishu, who has a smart way of analyzing college football, really thinks this team is going to be better than expected or worse than expected. So that's fun for everybody. Then you might be a $2 bettor. That's me. You know, I'm probably going to get like 13 over-unders before the season and just be like $2, $2, $2, $2. And then if I go 9-4, that's a smooth $10 bill right in my pocket. Bam. So that's good. Or if you want to go a little heavier, it's nice to have, maybe you have a great handle on it, but take some of the Tishu information, right? Maybe it confirms something you already think. Maybe it scares you off of something. If you there, Tyler Shoemaker, you're scaring me off 2 of the teams that I love. But we'll get to that in a second. So take all this in. You're here for all kinds of college football fans. So let's get to the numbers. Let's start with the overs, and we're going to start with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, which is a team that your friend and mine, Bill Landis, has I think said multiple times He thinks an undefeated season is possibly on the table for Notre Dame. So if we're talking about Notre Dame with an over-under win total of 10, and to remind people, this is all based on the 12-game regular season. This is not playoff wins and that kind of thing. So Notre Dame undefeated, that would be more than 10 wins. You like Notre Dame over 10 wins?
Yeah, and the biggest thing, I do really like Notre Dame. And another mutual friend, I know our friend Ari has them in his preseason top 5 as well. So I think there's a lot of people high on the Irish coming into this year in year 3 for Marcus Freeman. From a mathematical standpoint, I project them at 10.8 wins, which my numbers then calculate. That gives them a 91% chance to go over the 10 wins. And right now you can get the over at even odds, plus 100. So bet $10 to win $10, and I give that a 91% chance to cash or to push or cash. So, I mean, to me, that's probably the best bet that I have on the board here this offseason.
Do you like over under win totals that have a 0.5 so you can't push, or do you like it when a push is on the board? So like a 10-2 Notre Dame regular season is very possible, right? So that idea of like 10-2, but man, they've got to lose 3 games for me to lose this bet. What do you like it when you can push or no?
Yeah, I mean, now obviously, if it was 9.5 versus 10, obviously I would like the 9.5 better. But yeah, if it was between 10 or 10.5, certainly the comfort kind of safety net of saying, okay, well, the chances of them losing 3 games kind of astronomical, really. So yeah, I do like the fact that we kind of have a safety net here of a push, because unless something catastrophic happens, I cannot see them losing any more than 2 games this year.
Honestly, their schedule, they probably only have 3 even plausibly losable games, which is Louisville, Florida State, which are both home, and then at USC. Like this schedule, there's one thing that Notre Dame's good, but your numbers must show that too. Like the schedule is not that tough.
That's a huge part of this also. And obviously that's factored into their win total. But I've got their strength of schedule, which when I say strength of schedule, that for me is their average opponent power rating based on my numbers, minus 0.3. So they, on average, week to week, they're playing a below average FBS team. I've got them projected average spread for their games by my numbers. I've got them favored by an average of 26 points per game.
Oh, so, but then again, that's where you can get in. That's why I think bets like this are fun, because the whole thing is like you get to watch for the whole season. So even to make a $2 better like me, sometimes I'll go to 5 on a preseason win total because you get a whole season of fun for that money. If you're going to wait on Notre Dame and now you're going to get into individual games where you're trying to figure out, are they going to win by 28 in this game? Are they going to win by 24 in this game? I've got to figure out when they're going to put in the backup quarterback. I have to figure out, is Marcus Freeman going to call off the dogs because we're in a 12-game playoff and they're going to rest the starters more often? And now you're thinking about things that are more than football. Now you're getting in the minds of head coaches. Or you're like betting a Notre Dame straight up win and you're getting horrible odds because they're a 3-touchdown favorite. I feel like for a team like Notre Dame, when you're talking about nearly being a 4-touchdown favorite on average, you got to put your money somewhere like this in order to cash the idea that I think Notre Dame is good. How can I win money on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And you specifically do a good job of that side of the handicapping, analysis of when are they going to call off the dogs? Like, what's this game script going to look like? I think you do a good job of doing that. So, when you and I get together and talk about these games, it is very like, okay, we have the numbers, but then we also get your input of what's this game script going to go? How do we think what's this fourth quarter going to look like? Are they going to want to cover, a 27, 28 point spread, like you said? So I think that's very important also.
But they want to try to win more than 10 games. So you don't have to get in Marcus Freeman's head to make this bet. I like this one to start off. Number 2, you've already mentioned them. It's the Oregon Ducks. And this to me is just it's a different conversation from Notre Dame because there is a gigantic game sitting out there that is such a pivot point for their season. You like Oregon over 10.5 wins. We're talking about that gigantic Ohio State road trip to Oregon. Early lines, it's about a toss-up game. I think Oregon opened at least as a slight favorite in that game. But Tishu, when you look at something like that, I'm intrigued by your analysis here because, okay, yes, Oregon's home for that game. They absolutely can win that game. But let's call it a toss-up game. Now, if they lose that game, they have to win every other game to hit this over. How do you analyze their season when you have a game like that?
Yeah, it is tough. I think right now I've got Ohio State as a 1-point favorite in that game. So again, toss up there. That is the one thing with this bet that does concern me a little bit. Their strength of schedule average opponent power rating is 6.8. So Notre Dame's, again, for reference, was minus 0.3. So they're playing a full touchdown better team, week to week than Notre Dame is. So, but again, we have to, when we're making a bet, we have to factor in what are the odds? What is the implied probability here? So the implied probability from the odds makers is that there's a 47.6% chance that they go over. But by my numbers, I give them a 65.7%. So our edge on this is 18.1%. So again, just straight from a math play based on my projections, I like them to go over that. I mean, they do play Michigan. And I believe that is
November 2nd at Michigan.
At Michigan. So, the jury's out on Michigan. Obviously, there's a lot of question marks there with the coaching staff turnover and roster turnover. But I think if they can escape that one, even if they lose to Ohio State, which again is a toss-up, like I have confidence that Dan Lanning, their trend, when I'm looking at coming up with the team's preseason rating, I look at how is this team trending, or how is this head coach in particular trending, and I project forward off of that. And the Oregon Dan Lanning trajectory is sky high.
I think that's right. When you look at like possible losable games, we mentioned hosting Ohio State on October 12th, at Michigan on November 2nd, and then I'll throw in at Wisconsin on November 16th. But again, like that's, Camp Randall's tough, but there's I think a significant gap in talent between Oregon and Wisconsin. So you're really in a world where are they going to lose to both Ohio State and Michigan? And if they don't lose both of those, you're probably going to hit this over. We've lumped Oregon in at the very top tier of teams that are thinking national title this year. So I do think sometimes, like the higher numbers, man, sometimes it can be more reassuring to be like, I'm just going to take a team that has like a 4.5 win total and hit that over. And then they're 2-9 and you're like, what did I do? Why did I bet on this horrible team? So there's work to be done here, but betting money on an excellent team to have an excellent season and not stub its toe twice actually kind of seems kind of smart.
Well, and when you factor in, they've got the most experienced quarterback in college football and Dylan Gabriel coming back, that and a loaded quarterback room. So even betting overs is tricky on a season win total, because a lot of teams, you think of like Ohio State in 2019, if Justin Fields would have gotten hurt, Ohio State would have been in a world of trouble because they had nothing behind him. But Oregon in this situation is not in, they're not in that boat. They've got Dante Moore sitting there in the room, who might even be QB3. So I think you can take some solace in the fact that their quarterback room is deep, which is obviously the most important position on the field, and they have a good head coach.
Can I ask you an over-under philosophy for the moment?
Sure.
So it feels good to bet overs. It's optimistic, right? You root for teams to win. I don't know that there's a lot of people who got into the sport thinking like, man, I can't wait to sit down Saturday and just hope for a bunch of teams to lose. Oh, it's gonna be awesome. It's against human nature. And I'm a negative jerk. And I still want to be optimistic on college football Saturdays. So I think there is something within us that wants to bet overs. But here's the thing. At least to my knowledge, it never happens that a team suddenly in the midst of a season adds players. It's like, oh, I didn't know that guy was on the team. Whoa, what a bonus. I feel even better about my over now. You know what does happen every single year? Guys get hurt. And so that, like, the disaster component of, well, I analyzed this bet and all my analysis was great, and then this team had a bunch of injuries and they went under. Should people, if you're betting, say, I want to bet 10 or 11 preseason over-unders, should you bet more unders than overs because there is a disaster scenario that exists for every team, while there is not a miracle extra players dropped from the heavens scenario that exists for anybody? Should we actually lean unders on win totals instead of overs over the course of a large swath?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that's a good point. I think there's a lot more that can accidentally go wrong than can accidentally go right. Regardless of what the numbers say and how much time you put into the analysis and all that. Like you said, injuries can derail all of that pretty quickly. So, in a general sense, yes, I would prefer to have more unders, in my portfolio than a bunch of overs.
Also, the motto of this show: more can accidentally go wrong than can accidentally go right. Okay, that's Oregon. We'll pick up the pace a little bit. Mizzou, not of the North, border school, we call them. If they weren't in the SEC, we might take them. But man, they're tasty this year. 9.5 for a team that Bill and I certainly have talked about as a playoff contender. We've had them in our playoff picks for the 12-team playoff. A lot back. Maybe the best receiver in college football, coach with some juice, and also a schedule that is there for the taking. This 9.5 over for Missouri seems really good too.
This is probably my second favorite bet, or maybe even tied with the Notre Dame one. Again, we look at strength of schedule, minus 0.3. So basically the same schedule on average that Notre Dame's playing, which is...
That must be a mistake because they're in the SEC, Tisha. Please check your numbers. It's the SEC.
I was going to say very
best conference. T-shirt.
Very rare for an SEC team, especially when you compare that to like Florida, whose average opponent power rating is 14.5. So Missouri with a blessing from the scheduling gods.
Can I send that? Can you email that to Billy Napier, please? Wow. Eli Drinkwitz. Billy Napier's like, why didn't I take the Missouri job? Okay, sorry.
So I project them at 10.6. So again, from an mathematical edge standpoint, that's about a 45% edge because again, we look at the odds here. The over is plus 146. I believe that was at FanDuel, which is absurd to me. I cannot believe this over is not juiced. They're like Oregon. Their trajectory is sky high. I had to honestly kind of pull the reins back a little bit from what I considered doing with them, but I've got them at number 5 overall in my power ratings. I mean, they are right there.
3 teams with pulses on their schedule, and that's being kind and saying that Texas A&M has a pulse, which their win total's higher than I expected. So they have to go to Texas A&M, and then they have at Alabama bye week, and then Oklahoma in late October and early November. I don't think they would lose both those games to Alabama and Oklahoma, but I think they will be undefeated going into those games and could lose both of those games and still hit the over, which is why when you can find, I almost think that's kind of like a worst case scenario other than injuries. That's almost like a worst case scenario for Missouri this year is like they run through an easy, they're not going to lose at Texas A&M. They run through an easy schedule and then get to their moment and fall on their faces against 2 historic powers, and they're still over, which is why this bet is great. It can be a disappointing season and make money.
Yeah, that's the best kind. Yeah, I would be floored if they lost all 3 of those games. I can't. I'm with you on sidebar. I'm with you on Texas A&M. I think they're extremely overrated again heading into the season. I'm much lower on them than the market. I've already put in a bet on Notre Dame +1 at Texas A&M in week 1 because I think Notre Dame's going to beat them.
Boston College, watch out, Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien coming for you September 14th at Missouri, but maybe a good showing. I don't think they're going to go beat Missouri. All right, I really like this one. This one's really good. Back to a northern team, Utah, over 9.5 wins. This is the team that Bill and I constantly talk about as we think is going to win the Big 12. Do you have a lot of pretty decent Big 12 teams in your projections? That's the only part of this that would scare me a little bit. That's like, hey, conference is pretty good, but I do think Utah's the best team in it. And it's one of those things where, hey, you're the best team in a conference and your win total is only 9.5, right? Like there are lots of other, Oregon's 10.5, right? So like this is, for the preseason favorite, 9.5 seems kind of low, even in a good conference.
Yeah, and I think you hit it. I think a lot of people, I think the reason this number is not higher is because people don't really know what to make of the Big 12. So they've kind of just lumped them all together. I will say I do have them atop the Big 12 with Kansas State and Kansas kind of 2 points and 4 points behind them. But after that, there's a huge drop off. There's a touchdown drop off to the next kind of tier, which is like Texas Tech, WVU, Iowa State, those Arizona, those teams. But I do think Utah's the cream of the crop. I like their schedule, which average opponent power rating is a 0. So they're playing an average team on the average week. I like, obviously, Kyle Whittingham, great coach. They get Cam Rising back. Brant Keithy's back. I think they're going to look a lot more like they did in 2021, when they took Ohio State down to the wire in the Rose Bowl. So I think this is a team that will win the Big 12, and I definitely think this is a team that goes over 9.5 wins.
They have some tough games, but it's one of those things, again, like, do you think Utah's going to lose every tough game? Like, do you think that they probably have 7 or 8 sure things? And then do you think they're going to go 1-4 against teams that are any good? It's like, Kyle Whittingham's not going to do that. So I think this is a really good one too. At Oklahoma State on September 21st is interesting. Then following that up with Arizona on September 28th is interesting. And Iowa State on November 23rd. And then at UCF at the end. But like, they're not going to go. I think this is very safe. Now, the juice is not as good here. It's minus 125, but this means you really like this bet for the Utes because the juice is not quite what some of the other ones are.
Yeah, so obviously we are laying negative money here at minus 125. But again, talk about the average projected point spread. I've got Utah favored by an average of 20.2 points per game this year. So I'll roll the dice with Kyle Whittingham and the Utes to go over.
Okay. Last one on the over is Ohio State. And this is one of those where I think if you can get a team like this under 11 almost whenever, because a lot of times, right, when we're talking about the best teams in the country, whether that's Alabama, whether that's Georgia, whether that's Ohio State, these preseason teams that are always there, aren't we often in 11 or 11.5 wins territory, where you are talking here about liking over for Ohio State at 10.5?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much always a team that's talked about the way Ohio State has talked about this offseason, those teams are generally at 11 or 11.5. I think the difference this offseason, usually the Ohio State win total over-under is coming down to the Michigan game. But this year you add Oregon on top of that. Now, their non-conference is a joke. They play Western Michigan, Akron, and Marshall. So, I mean, that's an automatic 3-0 right there. Schedule, average opponent power rating 3.1, which again is bolstered by Oregon, who's over 30. So this is a 2-game season really for Ohio State. 2.5, they do play at Penn State, but even though those games have been close, Penn State hasn't really been able to get it done in the James Franklin era against them. So to me, this is a 2-game season for Ohio State, even if they maybe drop the one at Oregon. I mean, for Ryan Day's sake, I mean, they have to beat Michigan this year. I mean, they absolutely have to. It's at home. Roster's reloaded. Michigan is turning over a lot. I mean, if you don't do it this year, I don't know what that means for Ryan Day's future, but that's a podcast for another day. But I do like Ohio State to go over 10.5. Mathematical edge on this is about 15.4%.
So minus 135. Let me ask you a betting strategy question about this. You hit this Ohio State over, and then if Ohio State loses to Oregon, I don't think Ohio State's going to fall off a cliff. They're at home against Michigan. I think Michigan might be better than people expect, but I think Ohio State, I would be very surprised if Ohio State's not favored in the Ohio State-Michigan game, which is not the same thing as saying I'm 100% sure Ohio State's going to beat Michigan. But you could bet the Ohio State over if they have one loss going into the Ohio State-Michigan game, then hedge, then bet on Michigan. And if you're a little bit nervous, or if they beat Oregon, they might be 11-0 going into that game when you've already cashed your ticket. I think there's a chance in here to protect yourself later in the season if you're a little bit worried about Ohio State playing two good teams.
I think that's an excellent point. And one other thing to point out is, in the Ryan Day era, Ohio State has not really had those Purdue, Iowa losses to teams that they're not supposed to lose to. Right. Ryan Day, by and large, has taken care of business in those games. It's been the big games that have been the kind of the concern there. So to your point, even if they lose to Oregon and they're 10-1 heading into the Michigan game, you can hedge that. Right now, I project Ohio State as a 13-point favorite in the Michigan game. I think odds makers are at about 10.5 or 11 right now. So you'll be able to get a pretty sizable money line on Michigan there to hedge off of that if it comes to that.
So I was not a bettor in the pre everybody can bet world, but now I do my little things, and I like doing things in the preseason. But my greatest successes so far in the last 2 years have been on preseason bets for teams to win championships or make conference finals or that kind of thing, or maybe like a pairing of these two teams will play for the title, and then getting down to the end and then hedging that, and then I win the hedge. I've like never actually predicted anything to happen, but I've gotten close enough a couple times where I've won a little bit of a chunk of money, because in the end it's like, okay, maybe I was going to win this amount, I'll hedge, and hey, I won $80, which is a lot for me. So this is an opportunity. I think it's with these season-long bets, especially to have one of their two toughest games right at the end sets up a hedge opportunity. And hedging's good, right? Hedging's good. Or are you anti-hedge, or does it depend on the circumstance?
It depends on the circumstance, but if there's an opportunity for you to lock in profit, you're not going to go broke that way. So I've got no problem with hedging when as long as you do the math right and you're guaranteeing yourself some profit.
Yeah. And so like if you're not a gambling expert, what we're talking about, say you bet $10 on the Ohio State over. They're 10-1 going into the Michigan game. Michigan is a 14-point underdog, which means on the money line, you might get what, like 3-1 or 4-1 odds to bet Michigan straight up to win that game. So now if Ohio State wins the game, I'm going to win $8.50 or whatever on my $10 bet. But to make sure I win something, I'm going to bet $3 on Michigan at 4-1 odds to win this game. Now, if Michigan wins, maybe even bet $2. If Michigan wins, I'll win like $9. But if Ohio State wins, I'm guaranteed to win $8.50, and you're going to win either way, right? Yep. And it's the Ohio State win, instead of winning $8.50, now you're winning $6.50 because you're betting an extra $2, but you're guaranteeing a win. I think this is an excellent spot to potentially guarantee yourself a win, because if Ohio State has 2 losses going into the Michigan game, I don't even know if Ryan Day's the head coach. Like that's an exaggeration, but like that would be, they're natty or bust. They're 9-2 going into Michigan. I can't even imagine how bad that would be for Ohio State. I think the whole college football world would be shocked.
Yeah, it would be the apocalypse at that point anyway. So all bets are going to be off anyway. Yeah.
We're not cashing anything. It's the end of the world as we know it. Okay, quick break. When we come back, we're going unders and absolutely just reaching right into my chest and ripping out my heart. He's T-Shoe. I'm Doug Lesmerises. We'll be right back. All right, time now for some unders. A lot of Northern teams, not all Northern teams, here on Kings of the North with our guest, the great Tyler Shoemaker. T-Shoe, we're going to start off with Penn State under 10.5. And I think this makes sense because there is a game in week 1 that I cannot wait for. We've talked about it a ton. It's Penn State at West Virginia. And I think it's possible when that game ends, there will be people clamoring to get on the West Virginia bandwagon. I'll be come on, guys, let's go. And people who are maybe uncertain about Penn State after that game. I think West Virginia's like a 12-point underdog right now. I do have a bet down on that, on West Virginia plus 12 in that game. Penn State 10.5. They don't play Michigan. They still do play Ohio State. They play West Virginia. They play Wisconsin. They're at USC. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Oregon. And I think a lot of people have looked at like the dissolution of divisions in the Big Ten and have thought that maybe the number one team that is freed is Penn State. And I think that maybe is affecting this win total, because I don't think Penn State, I don't know that we don't have the history, but when's the last time Penn State had a win total over 10? Because they played Michigan and Ohio State every year. So it's like, well, okay, you got to win at least one of those games, which has not been easy for Penn State to do. But the Mountaineers would definitely scare me off betting this Penn State over. But you, in fact, actually like the under 10.5. Why?
I do. And I will say, I was listening to KOTN while I was doing, my weight sled in my backyard. And when I heard you
gotta do that? Why do you gotta drop in the weight sled? Why can't you? I was listening to your show while I was lying on the couch eating a whole bag of Cheetos, right? We don't have to say what we're doing during it. Tishu A can still dunk. You can still dunk, right?
Can still dunk, yes.
You can teach average humans to dunk. That is correct. You're a dunk teacher.
Yes.
You think you could teach me to dunk?
Yeah.
A 50-year-old 6'2" man who has never dunked in his life. You think you could teach me to dunk? You still play competitive recreational basketball.
Yep.
You coach your kids.
Yep.
And generally you bring it, right? Is that correct? On a daily basis, you bring the heat?
You left out the most important part to our listeners, and that's that I got the crossover Dabo in a championship game. And I'm not saying I broke the Clemson program, but I'm saying my team might have done that, because they have not been the same since that spring 21 championship. They've not been the same.
We will recreate that eventually on this show. Tishu, by the he's in the Clemson area, so like rec basketball with Dabo. What an experience! That's like a 7,000 word story that some journalist who has 9 months to write one story would like. What's it like to play recreational basketball with Dabo Swinney? Except Clemson's not good anymore, so nobody will care. Okay, you're hitting your weight sled. Oh, I'm in the backyard, just putting up 300 pounds on the bench 50 times, and you're listening to KOTN.
And I hear you say that West Virginia is going to upset Penn State in week 1. Now, mind you, I like the Penn State win total under, but I about dropped dead of a heart attack when I heard you say that. I was like, oh God, he went there. He went all the way there.
Green.
So I should preface this by saying earlier in the summer, I bet Penn State minus 9.5 in that game based on my numbers, but I do like them to go under. Their strength of schedule, their average opponent power rating 5.5. So they're playing, a team that's about a touchdown above FBS average on a weekly basis, even though they don't. They have Ohio State. They avoid Michigan and Oregon, which is obviously good for them. But I mean, 10.5. I project them at 9.7. The under is juiced to minus 140, which is an implied probability of about 58%. I give them about a 75% chance to go under this. So, I mean, this is a math play for me. I think the only way this goes over is if the offense really gets it figured out, and Drew Aller is who they thought he was coming into Penn State. He didn't show that last year. I think it would take a huge step forward from him. I do like the running backs, but you got to be able to throw the ball. As we saw when they played Ohio State and Michigan last year, if you can't throw the ball, I mean, the running backs are it's a moot point, because the defense just loads up and they can't do anything. So I don't have faith in James Franklin to get it done. Again, I take the head coach kind of trajectory and trends into my preseason ratings, and James Franklin is not someone I'm particularly high on. So I'm going to go under 10.5 for Penn State.
So if you don't think they're going to lose at West Virginia, then this becomes lose to Ohio State and somebody else gets them with your numbers, that a tough of enough schedule, whether it's at USC, whether it's at Wisconsin, whether it's Washington, whether it's at Minnesota, it's somebody. Whereas sometimes the previous conversations we had, it's like, okay, we're looking specifically, they only have 3 losable games. Maybe Penn State, you're not as, if you don't think they're going to lose at West Virginia, you're not exactly sure where the second loss is. You just think there's enough bites of the apple that somebody's going to get them if you're not bought in all the way on who they are.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's why I caution people when you're looking at win totals, don't do the thing I said at the top of the show where you just go through and say, okay, they played this team, that's a win, because win probabilities are not 100% or 0%. So, for instance, they play USC. I've got Penn State favored in every game except the Ohio State game, but against you at USC, I've got them as a 4-point favorite, which is only a 63% win probability. So you start to add up those, 60, 70% win probabilities, and the math over a 12-game season says they're going to drop one of those. That's just how the math works out. Okay.
No, that makes sense. And yeah. I mean, if you're, it's one of, do the math. Sit down and do the math sometime. People love math. If you're a 60% favorite, like in 4 different games, you're probably going to lose one of those games, right? So like that's the thing that you have to think about here. So I think that makes sense with Penn State. They could get to 11. They certainly could, but when you have a game like Ohio State sitting there, and again, to your point, James Franklin has that one win against Ohio State. If you don't think that's going to happen, then you're out of wiggle room. And this might be a team that needs a little wiggle room. All right, let's break my heart. Rutgers. Rutgers under 6.5. I think I said they were going to win 9 games. What are we doing? Under on Rutgers, a top 20 defense, a number 1 receiver. Kyle Monungai, one of the best backs in the North. Say it isn't true, Tishu.
You're back to 9-3, Doug, just for Rutgers now.
But 9-3, Doug, is the grand marshal of the Rutgers parade. If that happens, that's the thing. It's like I'm the king of Piscataway if Rutgers goes 9-3.
Yeah, that is true. That if they do go 9-3, you'll have a statue right next to Schiano, I'm sure. I'll be honest. My initial projections on Rutgers were even much lower. When I made my initial projections, I looked at where the market was, and I was like, man, I'm like 3 games off here. So like, let me dive in a little deeper. I bumped them up a little bit, but I could not come up anymore. The one thing working for them here, their strength of schedule is not tremendous for a Big Ten team. It's only 1.3 average opponent power rating, but I still can only get to 5.5 wins for them. I think 6.5 is too high. Again, the juice is minus 140 here, so the market is kind of saying we think it's going to go under as well. So that's a 58% implied probability that it goes under. I give it a 78% chance, which gives us about a 19% edge here. So I like Schiano. You said it a million times. He's the guy for the job, and this is by no means a slight on him or anything. But I think losing Gavin Wimsatt was a huge loss for them. If they had him, I would have been inclined to be higher because I think he, at least from an athletic standpoint, can run around and make some plays. I don't have that faith anymore. So I'm definitely under on Rutgers.
No Ohio State, no Michigan, no Penn State, no Oregon. And no Iowa. So they avoid like the 5 best teams in the Big Ten, which is like the crazy part of this. Their schedule is certainly manageable, but yet filled with games against teams like at Virginia Tech, Washington, at Nebraska, Wisconsin, at USC, Minnesota, at Michigan State, where it's like, okay, well, I think at USC, that's a tough trip. And you think Matt Rule's going to be good in year 2. And like, if Washington doesn't fall off a cliff and Virginia Tech is an ACC dark horse, and maybe Jonathan Smith and Aiden Childs by the end of the year against Michigan, and that's how you get here. So it is a losing proposition for me to argue with math. Doesn't mean I haven't done it with you before, but no offense, I will not be betting this, and I might be betting the other side of this. And I might be betting 9. I could probably 9 wins for Rutgers. I could get
you can get like plus 14,000 on that probably.
You sometimes on the app you move the little slider on the thing. It's like 6.5 wins, 7, 7.5, 8. And it might not go to 9. I don't know if you can slide Rutgers to 9. I might have to call a bookie and just be like, hey, can I bet $5 on Rutgers to win 9 games? And if I win, I get your house. See how that goes. So we may have to revisit this down the line. But I'm used to this. I took calculus senior year, and then I went on a high school trip to Russia. I got to go to Russia with like our exchange club for a couple weeks. And I missed like the basics of calculus. It was like in September. And when I came back, they were like, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I don't know anything that you are saying. So then I dropped calculus and I took typing. Wasn't that smarter? But that's why I could write a story right now about why I think Rutgers is going to win 9 games, but I could not do any math to tell you why I think that. So blame Russia.
That's okay. That's what I'm here for. That's the beauty of our show. That's the 1-2 punch. That is Doug and Tishu right there.
Russia's probably hacking this show also, by the way. So like they're getting us twice. Okay. Rutgers, this is not breaking my heart as much. This is interesting. This is Colorado under 5.5. Bill and I had a discussion about Colorado in our tiers the other day. My initial inclination was to make Colorado a bowl hopeful, which means 6 wins. Bill was like, I don't know, brother. Pull the reins back on that. We wound up putting them in still like a rebuilding team. They weren't very good last year. They were good early. They weren't very good late. They've completely revamped their offensive line. They have a really good quarterback and a great two-way player. And is there some public money here? This is Colorado under 5.5 wins at plus 112. Taking the under here, are you getting some extra juice because Deion's famous?
I think so. I think it was BetMGM reported that they had taken more money to win the national championship on Colorado than any other team. So it's like people are just lighting money on fire. Ari said he would be the bookie if people just want to pay him for that, and he'll give them twice as good odds. But yeah, you're kind of, if you want to bet the over here, you're paying the Deion tax basically. So I think the smart play here is the under. This is a point that I wanted to make about Rutgers as well, but on win totals, like there's got to be some sort of benefit of the doubt earned by the coach or the program, and Rutgers hasn't earned that. Colorado has not earned that. They started off great last year, and everyone was like telling me I'm an idiot because I had them rated so lowly coming into the year. They ended up winning 3 or 4 games last year. I think it's going to be a similar story. I think they could take a step this year, but their strength of schedule is pretty difficult. 6.5 average opponent power rating. I don't think they have the depth. And as we saw last year, if one of Travis Hunter or Shedeur Sanders gets hurt, like they fall off a cliff pretty quickly. So again, like we talked about earlier with the, accidents likely to happen, I think it's way more likely they win like 2 games than they win 8 or 9, honestly. So I like Colorado under, especially at this plus money.
They might be at parade territory for a bowl. So if they get to 6, it's going to be a triumph. And there's just a million different ways that they don't get to 6. And so, part of it is the schedule. Like they play like 6 teams that I would consider like pretty darn good teams in Nebraska, Kansas State, Arizona, Texas Tech, Utah, Kansas, and Oklahoma State. That's actually 7. Like those are probably all bowl teams. And so now they have to beat at least one of those, maybe 2, and there's a couple. So I think there's a way that Colorado gets to 6, but I think there's probably 8 ways they don't. So I think, and especially to get plus money at plus 112, sometimes it feels good to be on the bandwagon with everybody, but sometimes if you're like, you can see the bandwagon and it's like, there's money falling off the bandwagon, and the Deion tax is it's not Deion's fault, but he's fun and famous. And it's like betting against the Dallas Cowboys or something. There's a lot of people who just want to have that ticket in their hand. Although I guess you don't get tickets. They want to have that app photo on their phone. Oh, look at this. Hey, everybody, look at my app. That actually seems less fun. Kind of want a ticket now. So maybe bet against that. This is an opportunity to make some money here, maybe. Okay, break my heart one more time. Iowa State under 7.5. Were you not in the backyard flipping over tractor tires listening to us when Bill and I said Iowa State might have the second best Big Four in the North? Are you not familiar with the workings of Rocco Becht? Under 7.5. What are we doing?
I'm more familiar with the work of Matt Campbell, who continues to be, people love him. He's always floated for like the next big job. And like they had the one year that, was good, but again, we talk about the benefit of the doubt, which is a big concept for me when I'm doing these preseason ratings. Their strength of schedule is pretty good. It's a 4.9 average opponent power rating, but 7.5 wins. I only project 6.9. So this is not one of the strongest math plays overall. I tried to keep it, Northern centric as much as I could and talk about kind of some teams that people were interested in that maybe had differing opinions on. But there's still an edge here, definitely. 12.6% edge to go under. I project them. They do have an average spread of being favored by 4.5. When you go down their schedule, they're favored by an average of 4.5. But that just tells you they're playing a bunch of coin flip games. So like they're going to need a lot of those coin flip games to go their way to get over this. And I don't see it.
One of the more difficult things about this is if you're playing the game of maybe it makes it fun. I think they could be 7-3. Their last 2 games are against probably the best 2 teams in the Big 12, it's at Utah on November 23rd, and then home against Kansas State in Farmageddon. And those are the two Big 12 favorites. And so you could be feeling great about Iowa State at 7 and then be like, oh, they're not going to get the 7.5 because they hit this wall here. So beyond those two games, they're at Kansas, they're at West Virginia. They have, of course, the Cyhawk game with Iowa in week 2, which is actually going to be a banger. Like that's going to be, if you have bets on Iowa State and Iowa, that's a pivot game for those two teams, I think, I think absolutely Iowa can have playoff aspirations this year. I think Iowa State can be at the edge of that dark horse discussion. So that's a big one in week 2. So, and here's the thing. I do think sometimes there are programs that struggle with expectations and are better when nobody thinks they're going to be good. I feel like a lot of people, me, one of them, are talking about, I know Josh Pate's talking about Iowa State this offseason. And so now you put that on them and it's like, okay, you better win at least 8 at a program where that's not normally the expectation, where frankly, like if they went 7-5, I don't know that the fans would be mad, but right. You lost your money.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think they've got Pat Fitzgerald syndrome there, where when there's expectation, it goes off the rails quickly. A game I think that's going to be kind of a X factor for them in trying to get over that potentially. At Houston on September 28th. Houston's a team, again, differing opinions here. They got the Tulane coach in his first year there, trying to rebuild that. I've got Iowa State as a 6-point favorite in that game, but if they lose to Houston, I definitely don't see any way they go over. So I think that's going to be a really, really telling game. So again, you talk about hedging and that sort of thing. That would be the game that I would kind of circle to make a decision on how you're going to get out of that bet if you make it.
All right. Last one. Let's break some ankles. You broke my heart twice. Now we're going to break some ankles. Let's go to your friend and mine, Dabo Sweeney. I think somebody maybe back in maybe another show called him a weasel. I don't know I can't remember who called him a weasel. Might have been you. No, you play basketball with him. It wasn't you.
It was definitely me.
I was under 9.5 for Clemson. I mean, I think they're generally viewed as if not the co-favorite in the ACC, maybe slightly behind Florida State. So I think this would be viewed as disappointing for Clemson, but we talked about the Dion tax. Is there a lingering, remember when Clemson was good tax that maybe is still applying here when actually, if you look at what they've been the last 2 or 3 years, they aren't that program anymore. And like, why would you think they're going to get to 10? This is under 9.5 wins at -130.
It's really crazy to me looking at, again, my development rating, which is kind of a ratio of what was your power rating at the end of the season relative to your 4-year weighted recruiting. Clemson's recruiting has continued to be very good. I mean, it's definitely top 10 in the country pretty much every year. But their power rating the last 3 seasons since Trevor Lawrence left has been like 12 on average, 12.5. So, I mean, I literally had to go when I did my first iteration of my preseason numbers, I had Clemson at like 7.5 wins. Again, looked at the market and was like, okay, everyone's way higher. Like let me see if I can come up a little bit. I did all kinds of mental gymnastics and gave them every benefit of the doubt that I could within what the data was telling me. And I still can only get to 9.2 wins for them. And honestly, my personal opinion is that it would be lower than that. So again, this is not a huge edge, but it is one that I wanted to mention as just kind of a marquee team that I think is overrated by the market, both from a win total perspective. And when you look at some of these game of the year lines, they've got Georgia week 1. I've already bet Georgia -13.5 in that game. I think Clemson is a team that you can keep an eye out for being overrated by the market in the win totals and week to week.
And it's almost like when you open with Georgia, it's almost like their win total is, how do the math here?
10.5, yeah.
10.5. Because they've got to win. It's like they can only lose 2 other games beyond the Georgia, or one other game. Anyway, they're going to lose to Georgia. So keep that, like you have to have that in your head that they're opening with probably the best roster in the country, or one of the top 2 with Ohio State. And then where do you go from there? And they have NC State, which is a team that people like, including me, at Florida State, like to be on the road against the other top team in the ACC. Louisville at Virginia Tech. South Carolina is not good, but that's a rivalry game, and South Carolina's gotten them before. So this, again, is just not a lot of wiggle room. And do you just think like the market, there's just people who are betting this who are like, yeah, Clemson. Yeah, I heard of them. They're good.
This is going to sound crazy given the ceilings of both programs and where they've been in the last 10 years. But honestly, it's getting to the point with Clemson with how the market overrates them. It's almost like a Texas A&M or Miami, like where they just get, because of their recruiting rankings, they're getting super inflated in the market. But like the power rating correlation has not been there, at least according to my numbers. So, and obviously that's what I'm rolling with. So I was very generous with their rating, and I still am under their win total.
Okay. All right. That's it. 5 overs, 5 unders. Tishu, you've mentioned your guide. How can the people get their hands on that if they're interested in even more Tyler Shoemaker info?
Yeah, absolutely. So college football and NFL guides, package deal, $80. You get both of them, which includes spread, money line, total projections for every game, win probabilities for every game, all the stuff we talked about here on this show in terms of all the math. It's all broken out for you, nice and clean. Every team has their own team page where their whole schedule with all that stuff is laid out. So it's very, very neat and organized. You can get that directly from me on X at Tishu Index. Just mention me or send me a DM, and we'll get your payment arrangement taken care of. But yeah, it's July 1st is the official release date on that, and I'm really excited for it.
Awesome. Well, we love talking about this kind of stuff with you, even though you make us feel bad about ourselves in terms of body type and shape and exercise and all those things. But that's okay. We're going to use it as motivation, and I will dunk.
You have an open invite. You know where to find me. We'll go to Dabo's house after.
That would be the revenge. You crossed over Dabo. We'll let Dabo cross over me so it evens it out. He's Tyler Shoemaker. We love talking about college football betting lines with him, and this probably won't be the last time. So find his work. Drop if you liked hearing from Tishu, drop it in the comments on Apple Podcasts. Drop it in the comments here on YouTube. Because we want to do this kind of thing. We want to make this part of what we do here on Kings of the North. For now, Tishu, we love you, brother. Thanks for joining us.
Always. Thank you.
So thanks to Tyler Shoemaker for that. Love that guy. Love what he does. But I love him as a person. So let's talk about a couple other things before we get out of here. Next week, by the way, here on Kings of the North, we are planning a Big Ten West little farewell there. It's already dead, but we can still go visit it in the dead division graveyard of college football. I want to talk about divisions. I want to talk about what the Big Ten West was and wasn't, what it tells us about college football, and maybe like, are we sure that everybody playing in their conference a 1-2 title game is actually the best thing, where they're no longer going to be divisions? It's going to be the 2 best teams of the conference. It should be the best thing, but everybody has to go about this the right way. And I'm not sure if the committee will. So I think we'll have an interesting divisional discussion wrapped in a adieu. That means goodbye forever to the Big Ten West. Have some guests on for that. So we'll do that next week. And then it's July 4th next week. So I think we'll only do 1 show. But then after that, we're diving in. We will be in Las Vegas for Big 12 Media Days, July 9th and 10th. So we'll be bringing you coverage from there. And then a couple weeks later, late July, we'll be at Big Ten Media Days. So we'll be hitting a lot of our northern teams are in those 2 conferences. So great stuff coming. Okay. Couple things I want to touch on here. First is blue chip ratio. This is, I want to invent a stat. I want to invent a stat. Still on my list of things to do. But Bud Elliott, college football writer, did this about 10 years ago. Blue chip ratio. I like it because he does it, but everybody has the access to the information to do it themselves too, if you want. It's just synthesizing available information, taking available information. Like Tishu's proprietary. He invents math. But this is all out there. And you could take this information and crunch it this way too, if you want to, but you didn't think to do it. So you didn't invent the stat, but Elliott did. So blue chip ratio is the idea that half your roster in the last 4 recruiting classes must be 4 and 5-star recruits in order for you to win a national title. And the way he does it is there's a percentage, and it's the percentage of your recruits in those last 4 classes that were a 4 or 5-star recruit. So he said it has to be at least 50%. It's been true every year since he started it since 2013. So this year there are 16 teams that he says can win the national title based on having at least 50% of their recruits in the last 4 classes be 4 and 5-star recruits. And I love this stat. I love having ways like this to think about college football, but it's not perfect. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but acknowledging great job on the stat. This is a list. Ohio State, 90%, Bama, 88, Georgia, 80, Texas A&M, 79, then Oregon, Oklahoma, Texas, LSU, Notre Dame, Clemson, Florida, Miami, Penn State at 61, USC, Michigan at 56%, and Auburn at 53%. Now, if you listen closely, what did you hear there? You heard a lot of Southern frauds. So there is part of this. It's like, let's name Southern teams, mostly in the SEC, who gather talent and don't know what to do with it. Does anybody think Auburn's going to win the national title this year? Nobody thinks that. Does anybody think Florida is going to win the national title? Florida might not win 4 games. So as he says, the threshold here is not, are you going to make the playoff? Are you going to be good? It's like, can you win the national title? So when you only think about recruiting, you welcome frauds. And listen, you welcome Southern frauds to the con. And now introducing 6 Southern frauds into this list of 16 teams. So you have to do it because you can't cherry pick. But Michigan last year almost busted this. I think they were 54% going into the season. Washington was not 50% going into the season. So the North, I think, will bust this someday. I really, and listen, transfers change this a little bit. He's talked about like he has to figure out what to do with transfers. But in an NIL world, if you're veteran, if you get some veteran transfers, like that can really shape your roster. And this is not necessarily reflective of that reality. But the bottom line here is that there are 16 teams on this list. 11 are from the South, and only 5 are one of our northern teams. And our northern teams are Ohio State at 90%, Oregon at 76%, Notre Dame at 67, Penn State at 61, and Michigan at 56. So if you said, who are the 5 northern teams that recruit the best, that's who you'd say. This is just reflective of a reality that you were already aware of. But I very much believe in taking reality and numbering it and crunching the data on reality. So 11-5 is one of those where it's like, oh, it's 11-5, but there aren't any frauds. Those 5 northern teams, are there any of those northern 5 that you're like, well, they recruited pretty well, but I think they're going to suck? Nobody, there's none. There's like half the teams in the South. So that's one of the things I think about the North is that the North doesn't have, and this is part of the conversation we had when we put Florida in our struggling tier. I would direct you back to our 6 tiers of college football. And Florida's in the bottom tier. They're in the blue chip ratio and they're in the bottom tier. That's awful. That's embarrassing. There's no northern teams like that. Northern teams get bang for their buck. Now, maybe you would say, well, I wish Penn State had made the playoff, or like, all 5 of those teams are huge 12-team playoff contenders, where it's not true for all the teams in the South. So just keep this in mind when you read or hear discussions about this, because there might be somebody in the South who's like, oh, blue chip ratio. And it's like, yeah, but half your blue chip ratio teams are frauds in the South. The South is filled with frauds, maybe because it has to be, because there are so many teams that think they're good or think they want to be good, and maybe there's not enough room for everybody. But sometimes when you get on lists, like you do lists like this, there's just more bang for the buck in the North. I'll invent a stat to figure this out. The fraud stat, the fraudulent South stat. There are more frauds in the clip that, hang it on your wall. Well, we got to get decorations back here, and we get rid of the shadow too. There are more frauds in the South. Abraham Lincoln. They have things online. It's always in my Instagram feed because you click on one thing on Instagram and then it keeps coming in your feed. You can like have them make a neon sign of anything. So I'm gonna make up fake Ulysses S. Grant quotes, put them on the wall about Florida football. Okay, second thing beyond blue chip ratio. Let's talk about coaching. So the NCAA is doing all this stuff. Most of it you don't have to think about. Enjoy your vacation. Don't be like Phil Steele's magazine is out. Phil Steele, great friend. His college football magazine is out. If you want to lie on the beach or go to your lake or just lie in your backyard in a hammock and read Phil Steele's college football magazine, good. If you want to do that and look on your phone about legislation passed by the NCAA, you are doing summer wrong. Here's one tiny thing that did happen. They said, so it used to be you had a head coach and 10 assistant coaches, right? And they were the only people who could coach in practice. And Nick Saban started it, and every major program does it now. You hire all these former NFL coaches, you hire high-level college football assistants who don't have jobs, and you hire them as analysts, and you employ them. And sometimes if they're making bank from a previous job where they got fired and they're still getting money from their contract, you don't even pay them that much, but they just want to stay in the game until they get their next job. Sometimes you do pay them a little bit. And they're on your staff and they could crunch film and do that kind of thing, but they couldn't is a strong word. They weren't supposed to work with players in practice. They weren't supposed to do hands-on coaching on the field. So I started off doing college football. Then I started doing some NFL stuff. And I was like, oh, NFL. And I was like, oh, wait, the NFL has like a gazillion coaches because there's no limits, I don't think. NFL has so much money, they don't limit anything. And there's no educational purpose to the NFL. Although, is there the NCAA anymore? So what they have done at the NCAA is they said everybody on your staff can coach in practice. So is there anybody from the NCAA here? Let me look under the table. We got a new table, by the way. Nope, no NCAA staffers under the table. They already were coaching in practice. Don't tell anybody. So yeah, so that's part of why the NCAA. A lot of times the NCAA thinks it's like, well, we had a rule. We think everybody broke it. And we couldn't really enforce it because the only way to enforce it was for a school to be like, we had a non-countable coach coaching in practice today. We'd like to report ourselves. So they did away with the rule. So this is good. Now everybody's like, why do you have a guy in the building who knows about football and you have young men on the field who want to learn football? And it's like, nope, stay on the sideline, go watch some more film. So they got rid of that rule. So one of the things, what's the application here? One of them, and I saw Andy Staples say this, which is like a really smart way of saying it, is your special teams analyst is now your special teams coach. There probably shouldn't be anybody listed as a full-time assistant as a special teams coach anymore. Because now the person who was an analyst before can do hands-on coaching in practice. And he can go over and like point to the kicker's foot. Or he can get down with the long snapper and adjust his hand on the ball, right? And coach him up in practice. So you don't need to dedicate one of your full 10 assistant spots to a special teams coach. So it's things like that. You're going to have quarterback assistants who were analysts before on the field more, helping quarterbacks with situations. You're going to have guys who maybe have expertise at tight end or that kind of thing. Maybe some of like extra secondary coaches where they're going to be on the field with the players. So I think this is good. More guys on the field with players, help the players be the best they can be. What does it mean for actual hiring and that kind of thing? You still can only have 11 guys recruit, which is kind of what matters. So you have your 10 full-time assistants and your head coach who can go on the road recruiting. Here's the thing that I wonder about. So the one thing, like Ohio State, for instance, last year had a special teams coach. He did not perform his duty very well. Their special teams wasn't very good. So they fired him. And when they hired the spot as one of the 10th assistant spots, they hired a linebackers coach. They didn't hire a special teams coach because they had that special teams coach like going out on the road recruiting. Who are you recruiting? You're looking at walk-on long snappers. There's no recruiting that you're actually doing. So you want all your accountable coaches now to be great recruiters. So you don't need to have a special teams coach be one of your 10 full-time assistants who recruit. You just don't. I wonder if we could get to a point where if you have a veteran coordinator on one side of the ball who is really there as a schemer, especially if he came from the NFL. I think Wink Martindale at Michigan is a good example of this. I think Jim Knowles at Ohio State might be an example of this, where their forte and the reason they're there and the reason they're getting paid is because they scheme it up. It's not because of recruiting. Now, because everybody can coach in practice, could you get to a world where maybe your defensive coordinator is not one of your accountable recruiting coaches? Because before, if you weren't accountable recruiting coach, then you weren't allowed to coach in practice. But if Michigan said, listen, Wink Martindale, who hasn't been in college football in like 25 years, he is not really here to recruit. When the recruits come to campus, we'll have him meet with them, but he's here to scheme. Could you get to that? Could that be an outcome of this where those old time schemers with NFL backgrounds, and you see these guys come through sometimes. Ohio State, another guy come through a couple of years ago who just was not a college coach. I wonder how schools will apply this. So I'm kind of waiting for that to be like, hey, actually, like our $2 million a year defensive coordinator isn't going to recruit. But like, is that a hard sell? But if you just let him sit back and like be the king of the defense or be the king of the offense, probably harder on offense, especially if you're recruiting quarterbacks. But I wonder about it. So anyway, like you don't really have to think about it. But the bottom line is it's going to free up, especially big time programs, to hire some even more people. They were already hiring them, but they can hire even more because now they know those guys can get their hands on players in practice without the NCAA looking over their shoulder. Last thing, quarterback recruiting. I'm proud. I'm a proud papa. I'm a proud Northern papa. Since our last show, 3 Northern teams have added big-time quarterbacks in the class of 2026. And guess what? They are all warm weather quarterbacks. So right now, in the class of 2026, 10 of the top 18 quarterbacks in the 24/7 composite rankings are committed. 5 of them are committed to the North. 2 of them we talked about previously. Number 7 quarterback Brady Hart is committed to Michigan. And number 12 quarterback Noah Grubbs is committed to Notre Dame. But 3 guys have been added in the last week. One is Troy Hoon, the number 10 quarterback, the number 108 overall player who committed to Penn State. Next is Brody McWhorter, the number 287 overall player, the number 17 quarterback who committed to West Virginia. And the other is Oscar Rios, the number 18 quarterback, the number 291 overall player who committed to Purdue. So just let me do this. How about it? Getting after it. Penn State, Purdue, and West Virginia. Because guess what? All 5 of these Northern commits at quarterback in the class of 2026 are from warm weather states. Brady Hart to Michigan, he's from Florida. Troy Hoon, Penn State, he's from California. Noah Grubbs, Notre Dame, he's from Florida. Brody McWhorter, West Virginia, he's from Georgia. Oscar Rios, Purdue, he's from California. The North is going to warm weather states and getting quarterbacks. The tide, it's not roll tide, it's turn tide. Tide's turning. This has been a thing, and I think maybe what Northern teams in the past wanted to say is in a world where I thought we reached a threshold in college football where it's like, if you don't have a great quarterback, you're not going to win the national title. Probably thought we got there after like Saban era 1, when Saban got to the point where he was like, I don't know if AJ McCarron's good enough. He knew AJ McCarron won back-to-back national titles. When he starts going after Tua Tagovailoa, it's like, okay, game's on. I think everybody, Trevor Lawrence, freshman at Clemson, does it. Deshaun Watson at Clemson, all these guys that show up and do this. Do you need a great quarterback to win the national title? And so often in the North, teams are built around defense, which often we don't give enough credit to, sometimes built around the run game, but the North just lag behind in quarterback recruiting. And I don't know that that's going to be the case going forward. So quarterback is not the only thing that matters in recruiting. It is going to be a thing that we're going to touch on. And like, this is the thing to watch for me is, can Northern schools go into warm weather states and pull quarterbacks up? And how are they doing it? Why are they doing it? Is it because maybe there have been some transfers who have succeeded and opened the door? Hudson Card going from Texas to Purdue. Does that open the door for warm weather guys to say, okay, I'm like, we like what Purdue's doing a quarterback. Penn State getting after it. Andy Kotelnicki, new offensive coordinator, getting after it. Does that matter at Penn State? Garrett Green's success at West Virginia. Does that matter at West Virginia? Watch this. This is something we're going to keep talking about because I still think, it's one of those things. Prove it wrong that you can win a national title with mediocre quarterback play. But who's not going to be excited about big time quarterback recruits? We all are. So for Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, West Virginia, and Purdue to have top 20 quarterbacks in the class of 2026 verbally committed right now. Now you got to hold on to them. You take the commit. Now you must hold on to the commit. That would be a big deal. So the North rising up as usual. All right, that'll do it for this version of Kings of the North. We'll see you back next week, celebrating the 4th, talking about divisions in college football, what all that stuff means. And I think you might see Tyler Shoemaker again on this show too. So thanks as always to TSU, our great friend. Thanks to Mike Yorostowski, our great producer, for making us look good and sound good. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.